Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Nofal Janebi. I work as a director of Emirates Center for Happiness Research. And for those who've been watching us for quite some time, you can definitely find more about our center on our official website and on our social media handle. My colleague Manad will be posting information about our center, the link, and the Instagram handle as well, if you want to know more about our work and what we've been doing so far. And without any further ado, we are so delighted today to have this session with Dr. Nahida. The session today is titled From Stressful to Stress-Free. You know, our life has been overwhelming the last couple of years, especially with COVID, even before COVID, because we've always on the go and we've never had the chance just to sit down, relax and reflect and breathe and have water. We need to be reminded of taking care of ourselves and even do a little interventions on a daily basis to minimize the effect of a stress life. Before introducing our speaker today, let me just give you the structure of our session. So Dr. Nahida will be giving us, you know, an overview of the topic, and we will be opening the door for Q&A. So you have two methods to do that, whether to post your questions on Q&A box, or you can raise your hand and we will give you the option to unmute yourself and share your thought and share your question if you would like to. So we are delighted to have Dr. Nahida today, who is a consultant psychiatrist with Saha, and she's also chair of Mental Health Task Force. Dr. Nahida, I think the floor is yours, and we're so happy and delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Noof and Ms. Manar, for this opportunity. And it's wonderful to be here. And this is a topic we can never discuss enough because it seems to be the word of the day. Stress is like as prevalent as anything else in today's time. I'm going to start sharing my screen right now. Let me know if it's visible. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm going to put it on the full mode and sorry. All right, so it should be on the full mode now. Do you see it as a full mode?
No, actually, oh, hold on a second, perhaps. Okay, perfect. It is on full mode.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I just quickly happened to see quite a few of familiar names in the audience list, and it's lovely to, you know, come back. And this is my first day back from a vacation, a well-deserved vacation. And it was kind of stressful, actually, because there's so much going on day one. And then, you know, and I was like thinking to myself, it couldn't be more optimum for in terms of timings to have this, because we're talking about stress management, and this is how I have tried to manage the stress of being ready with the presentation on the first day with a million things going on. So without further ado, I would like to start on with what we have to discuss today. I don't have any financial disclosures to make. Let's discuss about well-being and ill-being. So this is a concept we come across quite often about, you know, mental well-being is used oftentimes, and on most platforms you hear it. And what I want you to understand is that what mental well-being means to me may not be necessarily the same for you. Each one of us is unique. What mental health implies to me is not for you. On the other hand, ill-being or illness, as any other illness, is typically characterized by you know, inability to cope with things, or coming up with clinical symptoms and requiring intervention. So we want to make sure that we have clarity on mentally ill and mentally well-being. So not everybody who seems to be grumpy or introvert or, you know, neurotic in terms of, you know, personality-wise necessarily has a mental illness. So mental well-being for most people is being able to cope on day-to-day life, being able to be in control, being able to deliver what's asked of them, being more productive, you know, not if there's a challenge, not breaking down. So that's essentially what mental well-being is. And it could look different on different people. So I hope this is clear now, because a lot of times mental wellness is not is confused to be the opposite of mental illness. So it's not necessarily the same. Now, the topic of today is about stress, and we have always heard about stress in a very negative connotation. People refer to stress as something very negative, something that's detrimental for health, and it's not always true. We have evolved as a human race based on the stress we've had. If not for the stress, our performances wouldn't be as good. So stress could be vary from good stress to bad stress to a horrible state, which is clinical depression or anxiety. So we need to understand what level of stress we're talking about here. Now, stress is usually actually it's a physiological response. It's not even necessarily it's an emotional response as much as a physiological response to the demands of life. Usually, oftentimes when you're stressed, like just before when I started, my computer just hung up and it wouldn't connect and light on. So I was wondering if I would be able to deliver the thing. So that's when you feel your muscles getting tense and your heartbeat going faster and you're feeling like you're not in control. So that's a physiological state. That's physically how you would be feeling, and that's how you relate to stress. Now, stress could be eustress and distress. Now, eustress is where you need that stress to deliver, to be competitive, to feel like I want to do better, or that drive comes from the eustress. Whereas distress is when this goes overboard and it becomes really unpleasant and self-doubt creeps in, and you lose control of yourself. On the other hand, burnout, which we've heard a lot since the pandemic, is when this stress continues to be a chronic state and people have forgotten how to cope and take those pauses and those breaks that we have not been able to take due to the lockdowns or whatnot, and then it leads to burnout could be, it's definitely physically harmful, emotionally harmful, and it limits a person's capabilities, limits a person's ability to cope in day-to-day circumstances. So I hope it's clear there are different terminologies and we interchange them normally in layman's conversations, but not necessarily everything is bad. So stress could be good stress as well. So this is another way of just looking at how stress is, and this is something that we all can relate to. Your stress is responsible for your performance. So if you have no stress, let's say you are not at all, the x-axis which shows arousal is necessarily the level of stress. So let's say if we have no stress, our drive to deliver, our drive to do better or perform is low as well. So our performance is not optimum. On the other hand, if we have too much of stress, the performance goes impaired, and then there's anxiety that sets in, and then there's a lot of mistakes that happen because you're overstressed. We need to maintain that optimal level of stress, which is where you have attention and focus and the drive and the energy and the motivation, and all that is in the middle zone where the level of stress is optimal. And I noticed this personally a lot. My daughter is a fencer, and when she goes into the fencing field, if she's not stressed, if she's very comfortable with the opponent and she thinks that she can get the person easily because she's much better than her competitor, she doesn't do as well. She could have gotten a gold, but she settles for a silver because she didn't go in with that that drive. But on the other hand, if she's too stressed and she has the self-doubt that she may not be able to do it, irrespective of how badly the opponent does, that she tends to underperform. So I've noticed that just the right amount of stress is where she delivers the best. And mashallah, she is a national champion for fencing, so I couldn't be more proud. Burnout, like I said, it is a chronic state. It has detrimental effect, and we hear that a lot, especially in workforce. People who are employed and are holding jobs and highly demanding jobs, such as in healthcare industry or teaching, is just as demanding. The EMTs. So these demanding jobs have always tend to be, people have been been vulnerable for burnout, but over the last couple of years through the pandemic, it has been more so. We need to understand the stress and burnout. So, like I said earlier, burnout is something that is really hazardous, and you need to take a pause and reevaluate and intervene if necessary. Otherwise, burnout could then, culminate into mental illnesses. So it begins with stress, it gets into distress, and then moves into burnout, and then mental illness such as depression, anxiety. So there are some clear demarcations. You need to identify, stop yourself and ask, am I just stressed? Am I just overworked? Or am I burning out? So if there are certain ways you can think of this way, there is when you're stressed, you're over engaging, you're doing more and you're delivering, you're able to, you perform. Whereas when you're burnout, there is disengagement. You're just going to procrastinate and be dismissive or not show up. There's a lot of absenteeism from work. Emotions could be overreactive, and there's more of hyper state of arousal when you're stressed. But whereas when you're burnt out, you're more blunted, you're depressed, and you're not sleeping so well, so you're really slowed down. When you're stressed, as again, you're the urgency to produce, the drive, the constant need to move. Whereas when you're burnt out, the hopelessness, the apathy, the lack of motivation, and all sets in. Stress has loss of energy, burnout has loss of motivation, ideals, and hope. Stress usually looks like an anxiety disorder, whereas burnout looks more like a depression. And stress could be physically damaging, like I said earlier. The heartbeat starts going up, your blood pressure is spiked, your muscles are always tense. So there is a physiological response that's happening in your body, whereas burnout is more of a prolonged emotional compromise. Both tend to kill you prematurely, honestly, but stress does have effect on your physical and physiological aspect of your body, so that's a little bit more detrimental for your overall health. Now, stress is the workplace. Now, we identify this with a lot, and almost each one of us here in the audience who's working over the last 3-4 years has recognized and can relate to this. And not necessarily it's because of the work. We've always, human beings have been into the workforce, but why of late workplaces are the source of never ending stress? And there are different reasons for that. And I think if there are any team leaders or leaders in this group who's listening today, I'd like you to reflect on these reasons, because you are in a position to alter these conditions. So, for example, it begins with lack of support or lack of appreciation from the management or the organization, when you just give and give and give tasks to your employees and not necessarily give them the resources or the training that is required to deliver the task at hand. You would find the individual stressed. Lack of autonomy, not giving any kind of control over the tasks that are being assigned. Values that do not align necessarily. So if the organization's missions, values are not inclined with the individuals, or the individual is not necessarily has a buy-in into the organization's values, there's a mismatch on how much they can produce. The performance goes down, and then that stress adds up. Or they feel like they're forced to work against their will or against their ideas. They're forced to deliver what they don't really believe in. The goals and job expectations are unclear, and we see that oftentimes these days, especially because job roles are always moving, and there's a lot of staff shortage. So someday today a person is given XYZ task, and the next day it's ABC. So the change in tasks without the support, without the training, again leads to people to self-doubt, to have that high level of stress, which we saw earlier, which results in poor delivery and poor performance. Dysfunctional team, and this is another big deal because we are such a melting pot. We have people from diverse backgrounds, diverse age groups, different mindsets, and not necessarily all our ideas and our values align with each other. And when everybody seems to be revved up and riled up about the job, they're not necessarily pleasant to each other. So this is a huge thing, and these are all the factors I'm mentioning in this slide are all can be fixed and repaired, and this is the stress that can be mitigated by small adjustments. lack of appreciation, as again I've said. Now, having said this, I have to say that I've been really privileged that the teams I work with are amazing. I love working with my people. The place that I work with, the organization has given the recognition, and they give the autonomy. So you can see people excel in what they do and do better and want to do more when you have put in place all these resources. So something for the leaders or people working in a position of team builders to reflect and think about. Moving on, so there was this wonderful study that was conducted in California by Professor Kelly McGonigal. Over the period of 10 years, she had surveyed people, and in the beginning of the survey, of course, she went into asking about the stress levels. And then she came back to the same individuals 10 years later to see how they were and what they were doing. So it was not just about their attitude and perception about the stress, it was also about, their baseline health status. And the people who were targeted in this study were essentially people who are embedded in high risk jobs like emergency physicians, EMTs, firefighters, people like that, coming from backgrounds which are typically known as stressful positions. What she did is that over the time period towards the end of the study, she referenced to the public death records, and all those individuals who had said that my job is stressful and I think stress is really bad or harmful for my health tend to have either premature deaths or have really bad health outcomes. Whereas those people in the same positions who had said, I love my job, I look forward to doing it every single day, stress is good for me, they tend to have a better and healthier lifestyle. So what you tell yourself is how your body responds. So she recommends, and she calls it, make stress your buddy, right? So this is something to reflect upon. I mean, and that just goes to show it's not so much that our mind is so gullible, but it's so much that how our perception and our attitude, how much it matters in how we are coping and how we are leading our lives. So it was really profound to understand how stress is viewed upon and what that view or that perception itself can impact. There is another suggestion when people talk about stress, and this often comes up, is people recommend changing the narrative. For example, if you all remember World War II, the way it changed is the change of events happened. There could be many factors attributed, but the most common and most famous one is the one which Winston Churchill goes out and says, keep calm and carry on to the Londoners. So the change in morale, the change in the attitude of the Londoners was profound, and then it changed the course of history in a sense. So just giving yourself the narrative that it's okay, we can carry on, or we got this, or let's move it forward. Looking into the face of a problem or adversity and saying, I'll face you. I've got this, So the way you are going to approach an adversity is how you're going to feel about it, how you're going to cope with it. The other few tricks that you can engage in when it comes to managing your stress is stop consuming junk stories. Now, this was repeatedly advocated for during the pandemic, especially in the lockdowns when we were all glued to our screens and reliant so much on social media for the stories. Stories tend to evoke responses, positive or negative. Emotions are triggered by stories. So you don't want to engage yourself on feeds that bring you distress. And again, you don't want to over excessively engage yourselves on any kind of social media platform as a provider. And having seen a lot of my patients, especially adolescents and young individuals who are so consumed with the virtual reality, virtual world of friendship, their TikToks and their Snapchats, it takes them nowhere. And in the end of the day, they feel exhausted, not having achieved anything. And also it triggers, like I said, negative emotions when they're too much over consuming junk stories, so as to say. The other concept is, people always say, you might have heard the statement, see the river, not the rocks. So it just basically goes to say, when we look for obstructions or obstacles in our way, that's what we will find. But if you look for the solutions, if you seek the way out of it, that's what you'll get. So it's basically what you get what you seek. In life, just as when you're rowing a boat on the river, if you keep looking at the rocks, that's where you're going to hit. Your boat's going to hit into the rocks. But if you keep looking into the waves and the flow of the river, you smoothly sail. That's the concept. So I hope it's clear. I mean, the idea is just to change your narrative to be more positive, to be more accepting, more, accommodating. So this is what I'm trying to convey with all these statements. Expecting setbacks, which is true. A lot of us, we start off well and we are always excited about things we want to do, but we never take into account the setbacks and what that setbacks would mean to us. So it's a good attitude to always know that there is going to be setbacks, there is going to be suffering, but we will pass it. It is not the end of the road. It is one of the hindrances probably, but we, again, like I said earlier, you look for a way out and you accept that things happen. Tell good stories about people. Now, this is called the Pygmalion effect. There was a study when people were told that before they were given any job, they were said, you're a kind of a person who performs really well under stress. Their performance went up by 33%. Now, these are objective, statistically proven concepts. So what you feed your people, your team members, your subordinates or your peers is how they will deliver. So if you are, and this is something we lack in many organizations that I've seen, and from my patients' narratives, from what the patients come to me and talk about their organizations, I feel this is something culturally we want to build into our system, where people are nice to each other, people tell each other and compliment each other and support and uplift each other. You can only go up together. You cannot pull one person down and try to raise yourself up. So this concept of I think Dr. Noof remembers, we were in a forum not too long ago, and we're talking about workplace mental well-being, and there's this woman who spoke about empathy versus decency. And it really stuck with me, because we oftentimes say you should empathize with people, but unfortunately, it's not everybody's cup of tea. Not everybody can feel what the others feel. Again, we all come with different personality types, different upbringing, different, backgrounds, cultural and traditional backgrounds. So not necessarily everybody can empathize, but everybody can be decent. Each one of us, no matter where we're coming from, can be decent to each other, being nice and polite and courteous. That goes a long way, especially when you're working in teams. Lastly, don't plan when you're overwhelmed, do one thing. So this is basically when you get excited and overstressed, like we saw in that inverted U curve, don't start planning when you're feeling overwhelmed, start doing, because when the fact that you are performing, the action itself makes you empowered, gives you a sense of like, I am moving forward, instead of being stagnant and thinking all the things I have to do. Let me just start ticking off the boxes and get to it. So I hope this is clear. These are some of the strategies tried and tested by Earth Time in terms of management of stress. I'm sure all of you are aware of mindfulness. It's something that's been spoken about a lot lately, and it's really something wonderful that if they can practice, if people can practice, will be very rewarding.
Dr. Nahida, I'm sorry to cut you off, but do you want us to stop and take a couple of questions? I do see someone raised their hand, or do you want us to have the questions by the end of the session? It's completely up to you.
I'm fine with either ways. Maybe at the end of the session,
sure.
We have more questions. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Sure. So we were talking about mindfulness and mindful. So it's said that human beings are the only species of all the creation that is capable of dwelling either in the past or in the future in its mind, in its thoughts. No other species, supposedly, I'm not sure how they came to this conclusion, but no other species sits down there and regrets about what happened in the past, or grieves about it, or thinks about the future and worries about it, except us. And again, the human mind is known to wander. I mean, I'm not sure I know of anybody who can just sit still and not think. Everybody's, that's how our brain works. And this is something very innate to us, that we have to think. But what we think has a huge impact on how our mind is. So if we are thinking of different issues, different negative issues or stressful issues, and feeling overwhelmed, our body response or our emotional response, our coping response would be just as that. Whereas we are thinking about now and here, focusing on the presence and being grateful, being mindful, that's how the body would respond. So this is the concept behind mindfulness, being now and here and letting go of the past, grief or the future worries, and think. And again, different therapists would give you different ideas on how to practice mindfulness. And I personally believe that it is not one size fits all. For me personally, I'm the most mindful when I pray. And I make a conscious effort. It doesn't always work, not necessarily when I'm having a really busy day. You can get there. But if you make an effort, like you put time aside to be now and here, what is going on now? And just let go and block off past and future. It's really good. I'm not sure how many of your parents here or who's fond of um, Kung Fu Panda. I'm a really big fan of it. My children, I've watched each one of those episodes. And there's Master Oogway in that who talks about, who gives you small pearls on mindfulness. It's really good. You should go check it out. And that's what he mentions there. It's like about giving up the past and stop worrying about the future. Live now. Now is the present. It's a gift. You have is now. You have the work you have is now. How it's going to change, and making the most out of it in the moment is what basically the idea was behind it. There's a very good study that was published in Harvard Gazette in 2010 on mindfulness and the wandering mind. If somebody's interested, you could click on that link down and probably be very intrigued by what you find. Self-altruism, and a lot of times, especially I think culturally, we have noticed this, more so in women, there is this tendency of being, self-sacrificing. We put ourselves at the end of the list or never on the list. So that's something, again, has a detrimental effect. You can love yourself and still be selfless. And that's a concept we all tend to learn. Unfortunately, either learn very too late or not learn at all. But I hope you can understand that loving yourself or being kind to yourself is not necessarily being selfish or being self-obsessed. You taking care of yourself is very important, especially if you're a caretaker or if you are a home maker or you're a team leader. As long as you're doing well, you can give your 100% to the people who are depending on you, and they do well. So it's got a trickle down effect. So you really need to take care of yourself. Now, taking care of yourself is not just self-indulgence. Some people say, oh, I went shopping, I went spa. Perhaps that's how it trickles, but each one is different. I cannot suggest you how you want to take care of yourself. For me, taking care of myself would be just, staying in the nature, taking a long walk at the beach, or doing Sudoku. So each one is different. So understand what your body feels is the best, self-care technique, and adapt it and do more of it. Take pauses. There's this wonderful book called The Pause Principle, and it talks about how when we are in a momentum, all of us these days are having this rush, and we are doing tasks after task, and we are assigning ourselves more and more work. But if we don't take that pause, I mean, it makes sense also, right? Logically, if you are even like simple thing as like a computer this morning, since morning I've been working, I have like a million windows open. I've let my computer do a lot. And when it came to the time to start the seminar, it just gave up. So we are the same. Essentially, we are going to slow down if we have too much. So that taking that break, that pause is so essential. I'm just coming out of a 2 week of vacation, and I can tell you it was such a blessing. So I'm sure each one of you would relate to it. So make sure that there are those pauses wherein you indulge in kindness to yourself. Kindness to yourself, again, goes along with kindness to everybody else. We tend to undermine how beautiful altruism is. And many of us who practice the faith of Islam, we know these matters in terms of hadith or the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, but it's not for nothing. They actually convey and they actually have a huge impact on not just you, on the community around you, on your well-being, on your neurochemistry, actually. So I'm sure many of you might have heard of oxytocin. People call it the cuddle hormone or the love hormone. It's not necessarily always about love. It's also about, oxytocin is a hormone that goes out when a mother is giving birth to a baby, or when a mother is breastfeeding, or in many instances you see a surge of oxytocin. And what it tends to do is it creates that sense of safety, sense of, it's anything that creates anxiety, it's exactly opposite of it. So oxytocin relaxes you. It gives you a sense of like, I'm in a safe place, I'm in a better place. This is what you do when you smile at a person. Person tends to look at you and say, okay, this is a friendly person, so I'm not at risk here, I'm not at, I don't have to worry here. So instantly you're putting a person at ease. So you want to make sure you practice more of smiling. And smiling is a form of charity. And as I said, it really makes a huge difference when you spread that warmth and that kindness that makes others around you feel comfortable. It's good for our health. It connects people. It stops us from having poor coping skills such as addiction. Many of us would, withdraw and indulge into smoking or drinking because we cannot cope or we feel so lonely. So that connections, and again, a lot of my young patients come and say they have a huge group of friends, but in reality, all the friends are online or on TikTok or whatsoever, or their followers. But that's not really, connections. Human beings evolved to have, the first lesson we learned as children, as man is a social animal. And now that was not virtual, social media social, or a virtual reality social. It is an in-person. Our touch, our hugs, our smiles, they all have an effect. So connect to people in person. And it really promotes that it starts maybe with an individual, but you would be surprised it is contagious and people pick it up. Again, just like altruism and kindness and generosity is contagious, so is optimism. The more you are positive, you tend to spread that positivity around you. So it becomes almost like infectious. Everybody around you, when you walk in and say, you could say, oh, this is going to be really tough. We are really lack of sources. You could say, this is challenging, but we've got this. We have a lovely team and we're going to work through this. And so you can see the difference in just the way your narrative is. Just the way your perception and your optimism level is. So definitely promote this amongst yourself. Now, before I finish, I always like when the topic of stress comes up, either in my clinic with my patients or any of these topics, the lectures, I tend to recommend these books. Now, there's this wonderful book, I'm sure most of you have seen the Netflix series by Marie Kondo, and it's a book also, which is Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. My husband gifted this to me back when we were still in training in Boston, and it was really hectic to keep the house clean and tidy and, in good shape when we have little kids and you're doing your residency. The book was really amazing. It not necessarily helped me clean up the house, but it definitely helped me clean up my emotions and my mind. And I learned a lot from this book. So she talks about how you tend to hold on to things that you're not necessarily in need of. And that's what we do in our emotional baggage too. We tend to hold on to memories about something that was so unpleasant, which is not going to do any good. You're not going to be able to change that occasion. You're not going to change what you felt then, but we still hold on to that and keep bringing it, like we spoke about earlier. We keep grieving about it. So letting go of that emotional baggage is so important and so liberating in a sense. Respecting what you have, and keeping things that bring you joy close to you. If you have friend circle that isn't just taking quality time out of you, just bringing you down, or just being, we always use this word toxicity. So if you think of anybody as toxic, make those compartments, make those boundaries between you and them, and say, okay, this is where I stop. I have had enough, and I'm not going to indulge more into that. So compartmentalizing. So there's a lot of different techniques she talks about, basically in tidying up your closet or your home space. But this is what I tend to talk to my patients about. Your brain is basically, in the end of the day, like, think of it as a closet. Make boxes for everything. Don't overspill into any box, and don't misplace things into boxes. Job issues belong at job. Don't need to bring it at home. No need to displace emotions from one relationships into another, and so on and so forth. And finally, my most favorite book, Man's Search for Meaning. We all of us, we live for a meaning. We know it or not. We are all looking for a meaning and purpose. And why are we here? What is the reason that we get up early in the morning every day and go on? So this book is actually written during the Holocaust, and the author was in concentration camps, and he was a neuropsychiatrist before he got incarcerated. And over the period of his incarceration, he saw people given. Some of them were like in healthy status, but still they died early or they gave up. And some of them would battle typhus and all sorts of infectious issues and near-death scenarios, and still be smiling and beat it all and came out of it. So the core of the book is basically that the attitude one chooses in any circumstances, the attitude and the meaning that they give to themselves, like, why am I doing this? They can do any number of how. So know what matters to you, what's your purpose, and try to, it might sound very profound and very enlightening, but it's really simple, honestly. It's very simple. You just get up and you find what brings you joy, what matters to you, what is valuable to you, and work on that. So these are wonderful books. You'll definitely not regret reading them or having them in your closet. And I'd like to finish on a quote by Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid. Positivity is a way of thinking, and happiness is a lifestyle. In other words, it is not what you own or do that makes you happy. This is how you think about things. So let's try to think positive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctora. It's a really insightful talk. And before we open up the questions, I actually have a couple of questions for you. Is promoting the discussion of mental health at workplace, and we've discussed that in the event as well. I want to hear your thoughts on that. Now, if the audience were here, they are fully aware of the importance of mental health at workplace or promoting well-being at workplace. Me as a staff member who's not director, like I'm not leading a team, but I'm a part of a huge team. How can I promote this topic among my colleagues?
Incidentally, we were just talking about this with my team members this morning. We always tend to rely on, okay, this has to be approved. It has to come from senior management. Program should be laid out, but that's not necessarily true. We could start at an individual level. Like I said, optimism and positivity spreads. So if you start doing something nice, the next person is more likely to adapt it. It could be a small thing as, having lunch together and speaking to each other and checking out on each other. So that's as a team or as a staff, what you're doing. And it's very, very important that on all levels, in all platforms, workplace well-being and workplace mental health is promoted, because we tend to spend a lot of our time on our work. We are here every single day. We take homework. We are driven by what's assigned to us at work. So it really becomes a core of us. It's basically the meaning of us, in the time that we are. So to promote that this is positive, this is valuable, and this matters is really essential.
I agree 100%. Like small steps that we can take, and it can further later on. A question from Kauthar Muhammad. What is altruism? Sorry, I did not catch.
So altruism is, I don't know how to say it in Arabic, but it's basically selflessness, giving, charity, philanthropy, all that comes under altruism. Giving back is altruism. It's the, let's say, opposite of being selfish.
Okay. I do see Huda is raising her hand. Let me give her the permission to unmute herself. Huda, you can unmute yourself if you have a question. Huda, are you with us? Oh, perhaps she was, okay. It's okay. Let's see if we have another question. Walid, I think a leadership in any organization should bake mental well-being in the architecture and DNA of the company, right, from the word go.
Couldn't agree more. And this is what I think any future organization looking for to be a very holistic entity should look for. And it does not just apply to healthcare or big corporations. Any entity, you could be running a small business, you could be owning a small chain of cafeterias, whatever. To know that your employees' well-being is important and to take that into consideration is going to go a long way. I mean, even for us, for example, if we have house health, thinking about their mental health, thinking about their well-being. I mean, this trickles down to as small as a unit of a family to a big corporate. So definitely, I think it is a must that every organization, especially a big corporate, should take into account how to mitigate, people's stress, how to mitigate any kind of challenges that might come up in terms of mental health.
That's absolutely correct. And before we take further questions, I would ask my colleague Manar to post the link of evaluation for today's session. And there's a specific link for our colleague at UAE University. If you guys want your training hours to be calculated as a part of your training hours, please register in the link that we will be posting in the chat box. Let's see other questions we have. So Mr. Walid also have another question. Dr. Nahida, what is your views on the role of alternative therapist in managing stress?
I'm assuming alternative therapy would mean...
therapies, yes, alternative therapies, sorry.
So I'm not sure if he's implying to psychotherapies or, supplements, and you have a lot of modalities these days of, accessing care for in terms of well-being. So if you're referring to herbals or probiotics or that, I'm not in a best position to comment on that because I've not done any research or I'm not in the habit of prescribing. I do a few which is known to have established evidence base, such as vitamin D, omega-3, probiotics. They've shown evidence that in mental health they have a lot of emotional effect. On the other hand, if you're talking about yogas, meditations, like I said, it's not one size fits all. Everybody can utilize a different technique and find the relief that they're looking for. Personally, for me, mindfulness is praying. So it could be yoga for someone else. It could be running for someone else, kickboxing for someone else. So it's very diverse.
That's completely true. And I would add on that now the scientific evidence approaches are more reliable in terms that we know that the science have actually investigated that certain intervention within through therapy or not. But there's also a paper that I cannot remember which university actually explored that, but the importance of using your hobbies to cut off your mindset from work to your personal life. And I've always been encouraging everyone when I give sessions is that if you have a hobby, pursue it. It's very important to let your mind a bit free from the stress that comes from work. And I've personally been doing that. We have another question from Mr. Ghulam. Madam, how to help an introvert who neither tried to share you nor to reach you, and how to help when these guys who's under negative stress and suffering?
That's an interesting question, and we come across people like that all the time. And we have this tendency that if we have to help somebody, we have to extract things out. it's not necessarily true. Sometimes just being there and letting them know, hey, I'm here if you need for anything, or just checking in, like, you seem a little low today. I hope all's well. Can I do something to make it better? Just being that positive source of positivity, source of support, and making sure that they know you're there is enough, as compared to like sitting them down and saying, you have to talk to me. So it's not necessarily, and not everybody is capable of engaging in an intimate level, but definitely to know that, especially in a workplace, there is a friendly face, there's a friendly voice, who's always there to listen if you need it. That goes a long way.
That's true, 100%. A beautiful topic from Elvira, said, wonderful session, much needed today. Thank you. We're happy that you've made it today. Thank you so much. And a very interesting question, Dr. Nahida. This is like really interesting. Maryam Zaabi is asking, how do I stop thinking about my children and think about myself, because it causes me stress?
So if you're not, and I agree with Mariam, all of us who are mothers have this tendency to prioritize children and just put us in the back burner. Our health, our priorities, our options are always back burnered. The only thing I want you to recall is that the longer you do that, the more you're going to feel burnt out. And if you feel like you're heading in a position where you feel like this is taking a toll on you, you're not going to deliver 100%. If you want to be 100% engaging in your children's lives, you have to be feeling 100% yourself. So and again, I think there was this concept, a friend of mine taught me, it not necessarily be balancing as much as blending. So like, for example, I spend time with my children and everybody's asking me majority of the time, how do you make time? You are so busy, you're doing so many things, how do you even have time? And surprisingly, I think let's say doing
Dr. Nahida, we've lost you. We can't hear you. Your mic is making a little bit of noise. So
nothing changed from my side. Is it all right now?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we've missed you at the part when people are asking you, how do you have time?
Yeah. So going back to this thing, when somebody recently asked me, one of the from the you've been doing so much, we've seen you everywhere. So how are you making time for your kids or yourself? And the concept of work-life blending that one of my good friends taught me, that's really what comes into picture. It's like you don't have to stop your personal life to start your work life. You can blend them in various positions, in various for example, doing errands together, running together, to a place. Maybe each one of you has a different objective of doing it. Spending time together as a unit while everybody else is doing something else. But still, that connectivity is established, and also definitely having allotted time. So if you feel like you're not allotting any time to yourself, if you have 100% for your children, make 5 or 10% and adhere to that 5 or 10%. To say, Asr to Maghrib is my time. I'm going to sleep or take a shower, nothing, but that's my time. So you don't feel guilty about that, because that is the time that's going to give you, bounce you back to go back to your children and their affairs with much more positivity and strength. So it's not necessarily only helping yourself, you're helping your children by being that. And you're teaching them those good habits. Because tomorrow when your kids grow up, they're going to emulate what you did. And as a mother, if you have children, daughters, you don't want them to show that, okay, as a woman, I have to be self-sacrificing all the time. And which is unfortunately what's the trend. But it's so important that we teach our girls they matter, their health matters, their well-being is just as important.
100%, I agree. Two questions. One of them is from Khalid. He said, in this part of the world, altruism is a part of life and religious practice, but all altruism practitioners are happy with their deeds mentally. Any comments, doctor?
So altruism, globally works, and it's religions or the scriptures time over time just has taught us and reinforced us the good habits. So not, I wouldn't take it as it's my religion that teaches me this, and it may not necessarily be your religion, but there's no scripture that says don't be kind. There's no scripture that says be envious or be brutal or be rude. So no matter which part of the world you go, which person you're talking to, their priorities are to be kind, their teachings are to be, oriented or aligned with altruism. So this is something that humans have evolved over time, and some of us have made it a part of the religion. But as you rightly said, that it is beneficial no matter if you are an agnostic, an atheist, or a practicing, of any faith. Altruism goes a long way, not just for in terms of your well-being, but also the well-being of the community.
Yeah, 100%. Another question from Hussein Mubarak, and then Fatma Al-Alawi, we will be taking you next. So Hussein Mubarak is asking, how can I overcome stress and PTSD?
So again, it depends on what's the level of it. If you are talking about PTSD, which is a clinical symptom where you are compromised, where your health is compromised, you would need clinical intervention. You might need medications, you might need long therapy, you could be enrolled in EMDR. But if you're just talking about not being able to let go of a traumatic event, but you are still capable of coping with it, still capable of moving forward, you just have to learn, like I mentioned in the book of The Art of Tidying Up, learning to let go. And oftentimes therapy helps. I mean, as much as I hate people, to see people being so reluctant or reticent about seeking psychiatric help, it really matters. It makes a huge difference. For example, when we were training in psychiatry, it was mandated that we were in therapy ourselves. So we knew what it felt to be on the other side of the table. And it is really liberating. It's very, very useful. You have an issue or not, if you are struggling with something, if something is bothering you again and again, seek help. It's not necessarily, it's always medications. It's a myth that you show up at a psychiatric office, they're going to give you drugs. That's a huge myth. There are lots of number of times that we will just refer you to possibly a psychotherapist or give you some, coping strategies. So definitely don't let anything keep lingering, because the more it lingers, the more it disables you from attaining the full potential you can in your life.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Fatima, you can unmute yourself and share your question or your thoughts. Fatima? Yes, Fatima, you can ask. Please go ahead. Okay. There must be a couple of incidents. People raise their hands and they don't have any questions. Anyways, Dr. Nahida, thank you so much for your time today. And we're so delighted to have you with us. We cannot have you again to give a session for our students as well, as they're back on campus, especially for those who joined the university 2 years ago, never seen the campus in their real eyes, but now they're going to live on campus and see friends and interact with people. Thank you so much, Dr. Nahida, and thank you everyone for attending today's session. Please don't forget to evaluate our session today, and for UAU colleagues, don't forget to register in the link which is posted on chat box. Thank you everyone, and please stay safe.